the first thing we're going to do is we need to do a little bit of setup, because this thing at the moment is, well, it's not set up the way we need it to be for the amount of topics that we've done and the way we're going to compare things, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is come up to this wrench in the top right corner, which has settings. I'm going to hit projector mode. You don't need to do that. But what you do need to do, I mean, you can. It will just look really bold. Everything will look really bold. What I do want us all to do is hit degrees. We will get to radians later on, but for now, degrees. And then where you can see axes, right? Can you see axes? We're going to change the domain and range that are viewable on the screen, okay? So if you click on the domain, right there, for instance, you might put minus 360 to 360, right? You can edit that there. And then on the y-axis, we're going to be looking at trig graphs. So can I have a suggestion as to what range should be there? Minus 1 to 1. Okay, so now the graph should be adjusted, and you can see what you've got there. Okay, now if I pull this back a little bit.
So how do you do the true thing?
Which thing?
Like, you know how you said like negative 360 to 360?
Oh, well that's going to be, it's just two spots. There's just two numbers there. Now you'll notice mine has changed, and so will yours if you zoom in or out. I've zoomed out a little bit, so now it's going minus 720 to 720, but you can zoom in and out and change however you like. Okay, now you'll see periodically this part on the left hand side, I'm going to hide that every now and then, because that way you can see the whole thing, because on the screen you don't get the whole view. You probably don't need to do that, but it's up to you. So what we're going to start with is sine. So if you just put in sine x there, okay, you'll notice mine looks a whole lot thicker than yours, and like I said, that's because I have projector mode highlighted. If you want to make it look like someone's gone over everything with a highlighter, be my guest. But I'm just going to do it so it's really clear for you guys, and it'll come up on the recording. So there's sine x, right? Now I have got the page number now, 127. There are a bunch of trigonometric ratios there that have been adjusted. There are minus signs and there are shifts, and we're going to investigate them. Okay? So here's the way I'm going to do this. If you just typed in sine x, if you hit enter, it'll prompt you to put a new graph in. Okay? So this is the graph I'd like you to put in with me. It starts off the same, sine, open some brackets, and I could write in, I mean the first one there is 90 plus theta, so that's the same as theta plus 90, so I could write x plus 90, right? And you can see it graphs it for you. However, this thing is rather more powerful than that. So instead of hitting enter now, I'm going to take away the 90, and you saw me do this before. I'm just going to put in the number a. Okay, so it recognizes you want to put in a variable here, and so that's why it hasn't graphed it yet. And I'm now going to add a slider. There's that blue button there. Okay, bam. Do you see that come up? Yes, good. Okay. Now this slider, you can see at the moment. Don't touch it yet. I've already touched it. Oh no! I want to muck around with it just a little bit more before we change it. You can see it goes from minus 10 to 10, and currently it's on 1. That's not that useful to us at the moment. So what I want you to do is press the number, that minus 10 to 10, hit either of those, and up will come a domain modifier, just like we had for the whole graph, right? So you can do anything you like, but I'm going to go from 0 to 360. I'm in degrees, aren't I? Now the step, if you leave that blank, then as you move the slider back and forth, it will go down however fine, you know, like 0.1 of a degree or something like that. I only want a certain number of them, so I'm going to make the step 15, okay? Because all of the interesting angles, like with exact values that we are aware of, they're all multiples of 15, okay? So I'm going to hit enter. What you should see is now the slider goes from, as you expected, 0 to 360, and if you squint really hard, you'll see some little white dots there on the slider which indicate the values that it can take. All right, so now before I start to move it, what's going to happen as I increase the value of a? Remember, I've got sine of x plus a. Yeah, Renner. Okay, there's going to be a shift. Now, this time I will do this by hand, because horizontal and vertical shifts are a notoriously confusing concept. All the way up until in the Extension 2 course, a major part of a major topic is graphing, okay? And people always get confused. Plus, is it left or right, or which way is it, okay? So I always like to default back to something I know, right? So if I graph a parabola, it passes through the origin. Okay? Now the great thing about parabolas is that we know them really, really well. You've been using them for years. Okay? So if I now say to you, well, what about this? You know enough about this that without too much mental strain, you can picture this without me drawing it, right? I think you can. Just imagine where it's going to be. Has it moved to the left or to the right? It's moved to the right, and you can be certain it's moved to the right because it has an x-intercept of 1, which is to the right. So there's 1, and then you draw it in. No problems, okay? So I always, every time when I'm like, oh, which way does it go, right? I always refer back to an example that I know. Minus will move it to the right. So clearly, plus will move it to the left, okay? So now I'm expecting, as I increase this value of A, it's going to move, well, you can see the colors that you should have. The original graph is red, the other graph is blue. They're currently on top of each other, but as I increase A, what happens? It's moving to the left, as you expected, and you can move it back and forth, or if you really want, you can hit play, and it'll step along without you touching it. Look, Ma, no hands. Okay, so I'm going to pause it. So now let's bring it back to 0.
Okay.
I like this.
So here's the point of what they're looking at. The question says, write as a trigonometric ratio of theta, so I'm just going to call it x, it's just a variable, doesn't matter, with the correct sign attached. They want us to interpret what is sine, I'm just going to change it into an x plus 90 degrees. Okay, they've got theta instead of x, and they have the 90 degrees back to front, but it's the same thing. Okay? So let's make A 90 degrees. There you go. Okay, so now have a look at what you've got there. This shifted graph is the blue graph, right? And the red graph is the original. Okay? So what's happened? What's this thing actually equal to? What's the blue graph? It's cos, isn't it? This is cos x. Right? And we looked at this the very time we were graphing, right? We said, look, this sine and cos is the same thing. It's just been shifted along 90 degrees.